Welcome to another special edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the terrible loss of Air India Flight 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say, joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt, Germany. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon, Geoffrey.
Viewers, this episode 154 is labeled Cause and Effect. The challenge is in identifying the cause. The effect identifies itself, a quotation from Kendall Pearson. Everyone wants to know what was the cause of the Air India Flight 171 crash. Most want to know sooner than later. Many want to know now, and some already know. Is this crash an accident investigation, or is this a criminal act? Was this crash caused by a deliberate act by a pilot or an inadvertent act by a pilot? Was this crash caused by intentional act or unintentional act? The preliminary investigation by India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, the AAIB, into the 12th June 2025 crash of Air India Flight 171 has found that the Boeing 787's fuel control switches were moved from run to cut-off seconds after takeoff. This caused a simultaneous loss of fuel to both engines. This resulted in an immediate thrust failure and descent. Conclusion: dual engine flameout, cockpit confusion, but no problem with the aircraft or the engines. Air India crash victims' families are not satisfied with the vague initial report. Relatives call for honesty, transparency, and an unwavering commitment to uncovering the full truth. Reuters report a mid-Air India probe, US, FAA and Boeing notify fuel switch locks are safe, according to a document seen by Reuters. The Financial Times reports FAA says Boeing fuel switches are safe following the fatal Air India crash. The US regulator's notice follows the preliminary investigation that found the switches had been turned off. Richard, what do you make of these reports?
Yeah, well, they are factual. The FAA has sent a CANIC, a continued airworthiness notification to the international community. And that will have been sent to all international aviation regulators, including the DGCA in India. And Boeing has issued a MOM, a multi-operator message, to all airline operators of the Boeing 787, including, of course, Air India. And we're showing a screenshot of the CANIC from the FAA. And I'm quoting from it. On July 11, 2025, the AAIB issued their preliminary report indicating that the investigation to date had found no urgent safety concerns relating to engines or airplane systems of the Boeing Model 787-8. The FAA acknowledges a reference in the AAIB's preliminary report to their Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin, SAIB, number NM1833, dated 17th of December 2018, regarding potential disengagement of the fuel control switch locking feature on the Boeing Model 737 airplanes. This SAIB was based on reports that the fuel control switches were installed with the locking feature disengaged. Although the fuel control switch design, including the locking feature, is similar on various Boeing airplane models, the FAA does not consider this issue to be an unsafe condition that would warrant an airworthiness directive on any Boeing airplane models, including the Model 787.
So what does this SAIB say about the fuel switches? Are the fuel switches safe?
Yes, the fuel switches are safe as long as the SAIB recommendation was followed and the switches were inspected and, if found to be defective, were replaced at the earliest opportunity. The SAIB, and I quote, states, in order to move the switch from one position to the other under the condition where the locking feature is engaged, it is necessary for the pilot to lift the switch up while transitioning the switch position. If the locking feature is disengaged, the switch can be moved between the two positions without lifting the switch during transition, and the switch would be exposed to the potential of an inadvertent operation. Inadvertent operation of the switch could result in an unintended consequence, such as an in-flight engine shutdown. Boeing informed the FAA that the fuel control switch design, including the locking feature, is similar on various Boeing airplane models. So the FAA recommends that all owners and operators of the affected airplanes incorporate the following actions at the earliest opportunity. Inspect the locking feature of the fuel control switch to ensure its engagement. While the airplane is on the ground, check whether the fuel control switch can be moved between the two positions without lifting up the switch. If the switch can be moved without lifting it up, the locking feature has been disengaged and the switch should be replaced at the earliest opportunity. And as we reported yesterday, the preliminary report states, as per the information from Air India, the suggested inspections were not carried out as the SAIB was, in fact, advisory and not mandatory. It also points out that in 2019 and 2023, the whole throttle control module was replaced, and that, of course, would replace fuel switches. But again, it doesn't make any statement whether after 2023 the fuel switches were checked.
Yeah. Richard, yesterday we had our say, and today we would like to let the viewers have their say. We've had over 1,000 new comments. So what do the viewers think?
Well, we had 682 viewer comments on the switches. This was the major focus. And I'd like to pick one which was, I think, 157 likes and 115 replies, which is a record for us. It comes from @Per Henrich Alterstieg. As an aeronautical engineer on the 787 since 13 years and also at Boeing, I know very well how the system works. The EECs can indeed shut off the PRSOV in the HMU and the fuel wing spar valve by itself if catastrophic engine scenarios are sensed. But what it cannot do is to operate the fuel cutoff switch from run to cutoff. That switch is 100% mechanically operated. Also, the FDR recordings of the cutoff switches take its physical position. If the switches are moved from run to cutoff, it is a physical mechanical input only. If one pilot says to the other, "Why did you move the switches?" that means that he physically saw they were moved from the run position to the cutoff position. And that can only be done by a hand-made input. Also, the question between the pilots would never occur if the EEC or the TCMA, through a glitch, shut down the engines, because in that case, the switches would still be in the run position. If, and I emphasize the word if, the switches would have been moved out of the run position inadvertently, and one pilot actually saw, as per preliminary report statements, you can bet your sweet ass that they would have been moved back to run as quickly as possible, and not after 9 to 13 seconds. And I have to say, excellent comment, and I can understand why you got 157 likes and counting. This comment very clearly explains the fuel switch physical and mechanical operation, very clearly explains that the FDR senses the physical and mechanical switch position and any transition from one position to another. And this comment also very clearly explains if switches are physically and mechanically moved inadvertently, then you can safely assume that within a second or two, people would realize the mistake and move the switches back to run. In fact, he says, and I agree, you could bet your sweet ass on it. And they would have been moved back to run within, say, 1 or 2 seconds.
So the question begs the question, Richard, why did it take 9 to 13 seconds to move the switches back to run?
Well, the viewers also have the answer to that question, and there were 585 comments on a single or dual engine failure. So let's hear what they have to say, Geoffrey.
Okay, Richard, well, here are some of the viewers' comments on engine failure. Joss Dennis, 3684, engine failures are recorded by the flight data recorder. However, this occurrence is not mentioned in the report. And Luke Starlight, Boeing bulletin, replace engine fuel cutoff run switches if not locking properly. Air India ignored the bulletin. No one can take this report seriously because the information from the flight recorder is sketchy, out of context, and not cross-examined by multiple independent investigators. There are so many things that don't add up. The ram air turbine was deployed automatically when both engines failed, as observed from the CCTV footage, and when the aircraft was about 60 feet above the ground level. Per the timeline, this means the dual engine failure occurred before the pilot turned the engine switches to cut-off mode and then back to run mode. So engine failure occurred before the fuel switches were triggered to cut-off mode. This indicates the switches were used as a last-ditch effort to get the engines to restart. And Edward Paul, 2433, excellent investigative work, Richard and Geoffrey. My question is with regard to the FADEC. If for whatever logical reasons, like false radio altimeter inputs pulled back thrust on both engines to idle, then the captain PM would toggle both fuel control switches from run to cut off to run per normal memory items listed. In quotations, in a Boeing 787 dual engine failure, the initial memory items, including cycling the fuel control switches from cut-off to run, are crucial for addressing potential issues that might hinder engine restart. This action helps reset the engine's logic, potentially resolving problems like hot starts or compressor stalls that can occur after a flameout due to residual heat. So my read on this sequence of events is FADEC reduced thrust, shut down both engines. Co-pilot noticed lack of positive climb, which the captain had already noted. Asked, why did you do that? The captain replied, I didn't do that, meaning he did not reduce climb thrust. Then the captain performed the above noted memory items, cut-off switches from run to cut-off to run as an unsuccessful last chance to relight both engines. What do you think about this scenario? And Shieska, 1949, I concur with your thinking here. This was no pilot suicide. On the runway upon takeoff, nah. We've seen flying into mountains and diving into the ocean, but fuel cutoff switches intentionally activated after the FADEC already indicated an engine failure is hardly a scenario for pilot suicide. Back to you.
Wow. Well, that's an analysis and fantastic comments. Um, and I think you need to ask the question, what was the cause? The preliminary report does not use the word failure. Uh, it doesn't even talk about the effects in any great detail, but it does say this: the aircraft achieved the maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots IAS at about 08:08:42 UTC, and immediately thereafter, the engine 1 and engine 2 fuel cutoff switches transitioned from run to cutoff position, one after the other, with a time gap of 0.1 seconds, whatever that means. The engine N1 and N2 began to decrease from their takeoff values as the fuel supply to the engine was cut off. The thrust lever quadrant sustained significant thermal damage, but the thrust levers were found near the aft idle position. However, they contradict themselves and say that the FDR data revealed that the thrust levers remained forward in takeoff thrust until the impact. Both fuel control switches were found in the run position. And I find when the preliminary report contradicts itself, you've got to ask why. The preliminary report does not use the word cause nor the word effect. And in my view, if you deliberately select the fuel switches to cut off, to commit suicide, for example, then I don't think you're bothered to switch them back to run 13 seconds later. In my view, if you inadvertently select the fuel switch to cut off, you will immediately realize the mishap and switch them back to run.
One of the things too, Richard, that hasn't been addressed is we saw dozens and dozens and dozens of people scampering all over this wreckage. One wonders if somebody didn't muck around with these settings,
Yeah.
in the wreckage. I mean, there's people everywhere, and this is one of the reasons why the whole site should have been sanitized from the very word go, but that wasn't the case. But
Yeah.
Richard, sadly, not everybody agrees with us. This will come as a shock to you. Um, Mick, Mike Mick's son, 64, 69. These guys have stepped on their credibility over the last 4 videos. Oh, sorry, Mike. And Safar UK, responding to Mike Mick's son, I totally agree. I'm surprised that Richard claims his poor CCTV footage analysis as the proof of a single engine failure. And the black timer, exactly right. There was no engine failure. We are watching the moment the engine was cut off.
Yeah, well, I don't expect everyone to agree, and we invite viewers to disagree. So here we have it. We have said many times the preliminary report leads us to believe that there was no engine failure, either a single or a dual engine failure. We are led to believe that there was a simultaneous loss of thrust, and that was simply because, and solely because, the fuel switches, both of them, were deliberately switched to cutoff. As you say, the conclusion that we are led to believe is dual engine flameout, cockpit confusion, and no problem with the aircraft or with the engines. Now, some people buy that story, but I do not.
So, Richard, what is your conclusion as we continue our deep dive and analysis into this tragedy?
Well, it's a work in progress, and I don't think we should come to any final conclusions at this stage. It is a fact that the preliminary report leads everyone to believe there's a dual simultaneous engine flameout, cockpit confusion, and the aircraft and engines and the systems and the switches were fine. I think the preliminary report is designed and carefully worded to be misleading and blame the pilot unnamed without the factual evidence to support that conclusion.
Hmm.
I believe the pilot experienced a single engine failure at rotation and a second engine failure 4 seconds later during the initial climb. And I think the pilots recycled the fuel switches physically and mechanically when the ICAS told them that the FADEC had reported first engine auto start and then engine fail start. And it may have reported that for both the left and the right engine. We need to have the ICAS messages, which we do not have and were not given in the preliminary report. The pilot would cycle the fuel switch to force a manual restart. One of the viewers said memory item would be done immediately and automatically. We also know there was no time even to do a gear up. It may have been selected, but it didn't happen, and everyone has observed that. One engine apparently restarted in time, and the second engine failed to restart, according to the preliminary report, or failed to restart immediately, but also eventually restarted. So it appears the engines were indeed working fine. There must be some other reason why we experienced this dual engine failure. I also remember the sole survivor reporting the engines revving up towards the end of the flight. And, you have to ask, where is the FDR data which shows us the thrust levels achieved by both engines after relight? I'm beginning to understand why the NTSB threatened to walk out and go home.
Yes, indeed. Here are 3 viewer comments, Richard, to close on. Form Gibbon. I'm confused. The right engine failure was before the fuel cutoff, ? And Skip Fisher. Gentlemen, great work. I'm more confused than ever. I don't know what is true and what is not. For example, the report makes no mention of problems with the engines and recommends no actions for GE and Boeing. Yet there is Richard's work showing the apparent smoke from engine 1. Absolutely. It doesn't make sense. No release of the transcript of the voice recorder, yet insinuation of a murder-suicide. There appears to be no reason to withhold the transcript. It clearly isn't a national security issue, and the entire crew is deceased. And Idar Polden, 5913, I'm totally fed up. I'm in transit in Frankfurt, but I'm just not going with Boeing and Air India. The preliminary report just makes more confusion. Deliberate pilot action is always a possibility, but can easily be confirmed or ruled out.
Excellent points, and thank you for those. I think my last word, the preliminary report was designed to confuse everybody, and it appears the ploy has worked.
And one other thing here, Richard, going through all these thousands of comments, there are people who are commenting who have a limited knowledge of aviation, and they're making some very interesting comments. There are some people with considerable knowledge of aviation, and they're making great comments. But the interesting part to me is you've got a lot of professional people, pilots, engineers, who have been in the industry for 50 years. They are confused. They are saying this report is a sham, if you like. And that really is very telling to me, and I'm sure it is telling to you, that
Indeed.
this report is just not up to scratch at all.
Yeah, I concur absolutely with that summary.
Mm. When you're getting, Lufthansa 787 captains saying this is not right, and you've got other people all over the world saying this is a seriously flawed report.
Yep.
It's not good for the travelling public. It's not good for Indian aviation, and it's a disgrace for the families and friends of the victims of this terrible tragedy.
Very sad, though.
Yeah, absolutely. It's terribly sad. So viewers, thank you for watching. Please subscribe to us. Please like us. Please keep those wonderful questions and comments coming. And Richard, a very special thank you for the tremendous work you've done today on analysing or further analysing this terrible tragedy and this report. And we'll be back tomorrow, will we not, with looking at further
And
themes as more information leaks
yeah,
out. And the leaks are starting, aren't they?
the leaks are starting, and I'm sure we'll have a bunch more comments and questions.
Mm,
But we've hardly touched on the 1,000 comments that we had in the last 24 hours. So
yeah,
there's plenty of stuff to go through and to discuss for several days to come.
absolutely. So viewers, please tune in tomorrow. We look forward to your company and thank you again for your fabulous support. We deeply appreciate it. Thank you.